I counted in rings, because rings were the only clock the cold hadn't taken from me. My body grows the way stone grows, in slow, concentric layers, and a single ring forms each time my lattice completes a resonance cycle, what my people once called a season, before we lost the word for season along with everything else. By my rings, 11 had passed since I sent the request. 11 seasons adrift in the hollowed shell of the Vantopen. 11 slow turns of growth since I keyed the beacon and asked Earth for a coil. I did not know then that a ring of my kind and a year of theirs were not the same length. I did not know how badly I had undercounted. I would not learn it until the day the sky outside our cracked hull stopped being empty. The Vantopen had not been built to carry refugees. It had been built as a mining hulk, gutted and resealed in a hurry when our home cluster's star went the wrong kind of unstable. And 400 of us, what was left of the Selith after the evacuation, had packed ourselves into its frozen holds and pointed it at the nearest charted relay. The ship's old reactor kept us breathing. Its resonance coil kept the cold sleep frames from drifting out of phase, which is a polite way of saying it kept 400 sleeping bodies from dying quietly in their racks. I was the one awake. I was always the one awake. An archivist's duty, to keep the count, to keep the log, to wake if anything failed. The coil failed in my third ring of the crossing. I patched it twice with parts that were never meant to hold a third patch. A length of conduit pulled from a dead mining drill. A resonance baffle scavenged from a sleeper frame, whose occupant I had quietly moved in with another. Each patch bought me roughly 2 rings before it began to drift, and each time the drift started, I would sit beside the housing for hours, listening to the pitch of it through my own lattice, trying to coax another season out of metal that had already given more than it had. I understand now that it was also a kind of stubborn pride, the archivist's belief that the failure was mine to solve quietly, that asking too soon would be a confession I was not yet willing to make. By the 11th ring, I knew the next failure would be the last one, and I did the only thing left to do. I sent a request out along the relay. Narrow band, cheap, modest. I did not ask for rescue. I asked for a coil. I sent the request and went back to keeping the count, and I did not expect an answer in any rings I had left. The answer came on what I logged as ring 11, hour 40, though I would later learn it was something closer to year 14, by the calendar of the people who answered. I felt it before I understood it, a tremor through the Vantopen's hull that I first mistook for structural failure, the kind of shudder that means a ship is finally, after all this patience, coming apart. I went to the observation slit expecting to log our death. Instead, I saw daylight. Real daylight, planet-bounced and warm, pouring through the gap where the slit's frost had finally burned away in the new light, and against that light, ships. Not one ship. I tried to count them the way I count everything, in rings, in layers, and I could not make the shape stop growing. A repair tender, blunt-nosed and businesslike, already extending grapples toward our hull before its crew had finished their first transmission. Behind it, vast and white-hulled, lit along every seam, something that could only be a hospital ship, the kind of vessel you build when you expect to carry the wounded, not the merely cold. And behind that, holding position at a courteous distance, the way a host holds a door, an escort of warships, engines banked to a slow gold idle, doing nothing but being present, being ready, being more than anyone needed for a coil. I had not asked for a tender, a hospital, and a fleet standing patient escort over 400 strangers it had never met. Their liaison came across in a small craft of her own, and she was unhurried in a way I found I could not match. She introduced herself with a title I have since learned means something like quartermaster, though that word does no justice to what she was doing, which was carrying, in her own hands, the coil. The actual coil. A small gray cylinder, unremarkable. Exactly what I had asked for, cradled like something that mattered. "You asked for one of these," she said, through the translation lattice we built together in the first clumsy hour. "We brought one. We also brought everything else, because 11 of your rings is 14 of our years, and nobody should spend 14 years patching the same failing part alone." I told her, because by then the shame of it had caught up with the relief, that I had not known. That if I had understood the years, I would have asked for more, or asked sooner, or not waited until the third patch to ask at all. She looked at me the way I imagine a parent looks at a child who has just confessed to hiding an illness, rather than become a burden, which is to say, without anger, only a kind of tired tenderness. "That's exactly why we didn't just send the coil," she said. "We don't wait for someone to ask the right size of question. We answer the real one underneath it." The medics went through the Vantopen's frozen holds like weather, warm and fast and everywhere at once, and woke my 400 sleepers in groups small enough that no one panickled, and explained to each of them, gently, that the world they had left no longer existed in the shape they remembered, and that this, the tender, the hospital ship, the fleet idling patient and gold lit outside, was the world that had grown in its place. I stayed near the frame of a young laborer named Ovrin, the one whose resonance baffle I had taken for my second patch without ever telling her, and watched a medic explain to her, slowly, that 14 years had passed, and that the cousin she had gone to sleep beside in the next rack had been moved, by me, into a different frame entirely, to keep them both breathing a little longer. She did not ask why I had not told her. She only asked, once she understood the scale of the silence she had slept through, whether the rest of us had made it. I told her yes, all 400, and watched something in her lattice settle that I recognized, because it was the same thing settling in mine. I watched commanders who had once weighed the cost of moving 400 displaced to Selith and decided we were not worth the fuel. I do not have an Earth word for what I felt, watching the repair crews thread new coil housing through our hull with the unhurried competence of people doing a job they had clearly done before, for someone else, somewhere else, and would do again. My own language has a chime for it, 3 notes, rising, the third one held longer than the others, and on the day the tender finished its work and prepared to fold its grapples and go, I pressed my hand to the hull plate nearest the quartermaster's small craft and gave her that chime, untranslated, because the lattice we'd built had no entry for it yet, and I did not want to wait for one. She did not ask what it meant. She only recorded it, carefully, the way she had carried the coil, and told her own people to keep it on file exactly as it was, unconverted, in case anyone ever needed to hear it again. I still do not know, precisely, how many of their years that comes to. I have stopped trying to make the 2 clocks agree. I keep the new count differently now, not as the distance since I last asked for help, but as the distance since I learned that the help, when it finally came, had never once stopped being counted on the other end.